Jaime, you're muted if you're telling me to go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are we going? Okay. Sorry. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Astro Imaging channel. My name is Molly, and we've got a great show tonight for you about Nina. And we'll get to, give a couple details about that in a sec. But first, let's see what I want to do first. First, I'm going to have Marcia talk a little bit here about a project that she's wanting to do for a talk to come on the show. Marcia, go ahead.
Terrific. I was talking to Alex, and I recently had the privilege of doing some collaborative imaging. You can see the boogeyman. And we learned a lot in the process. And it occurred to me and to Alex that there are others among the group who've had good experiences making collaborative imaging. I'd be very grateful to hear from you. If you go to the website and go to the Contact Us page, if you've been involved in collaborative imaging, please be in touch. What we'd like to do is to put a show together with the pros and the advantages, and then of course all the wonderful collaborative imaging that has been done. So please head to the website, go to the contact page, and let us know who you are. Thanks.
All right, thanks so much, Marcia. Yeah, definitely go participate in that if you've been involved in collaborative imaging. I'm just doing my first collaborative project here on Cassiopeia A with Drug Struble, so looking forward to that. Already hitting some challenges. So yeah, all right. Let me flash our calendar real quick here. Let's see, to just let you guys know what is coming up before we dive in for tonight. So yeah, tonight we have Dustin Brimberry talking about Nina. The title got cut off here a little bit, but he's going to be talking about. Let's see, I had a couple notes here. Yeah, so some basically how to use Nina as a beginner. So polar alignment and plate solving, practical strategies, setting up automated imaging sessions, meridian flips, being able to run all night. So you'll get to hear all of that tonight. And then next week, we have Christian Sass coming on, talking about a new image processing software called StarPX. StarPix, I should ask. And it's a brand new software that I don't think has quite fully come out yet, but he'll be talking about that. And then the following Sunday, we have Bray Falls. We're circling back over to, we had a lot of remote observatory talks, I think, last year, and coming back around to that topic again this year. There's so much to know about building a remote observatory, and everybody's got different tips and tricks, and this should be great. And then the following Sunday, we have Jim Thompson on talking about solar imaging, so that should be exciting. Then we're off for NEAC, and then we have a opening on April 13th. So if you're interested in giving a talk and might want to give a talk as early as April 13th, we would love to have you on. Send us an email on the Contact Us button on the astroimagingchannel.org. And then we're not having a show on Easter weekend. And then the calendar goes on from there. Oh, my cat has decided to enter the frame. All right, let me stop presenting here. All right, and I think with that, we will go ahead and get started with tonight's main show. So, Dustin?
Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing? Let me get my screen over here for you. Put this up. I'll come back to Nina in a minute. I'm going to start with just going through some slides and just talking to you a little bit and just kind of having a casual conversation. So we'll talk about, astrophotography for beginners, because this hobby, I mean, people are, all levels in this hobby. And I myself am very new to the hobby. I'll talk about that a little bit as I go through getting started here as well. But I want to talk to you a little bit about, some of my things I've had to overcome and some of the things I've had to deal with, and give you some of my best practices. Yours may be totally different, and that's perfectly okay. That's the great thing about this hobby too. We all do things differently, but at the end of the day, we just want to get some great images, and I'll show you some at the end that I've taken. And also I'm gonna, since Starfront is live tonight, my telescope is out there. I will go to connect to my telescope remotely and go through a couple of things with you. All right, so as Molly mentioned, my name is Dustin Brimberry. I live in Central Texas. Not the greatest skies, Bortle 3, Bortle 4. I mean, it's a lot better than some that I hear, but you know, it's not terrible. But I didn't have the best place to be using my telescope because you can see here all those trees. Yeah, I got a great west. That's not so good for astrophotography, going watching stuff when it gets ready to go down, but it's great for watching sunsets. In my day job, I work for a company called Snowflake, and I'm an instructor for Snowflake. And you know, I don't know if you've heard of Snowflake, but we're a big data analytics company. I've been married for 36 years, and I have 2 adult children. So, you know, I was into astronomy long ago. Um, I got my first exposure to it when I was 8 by seeing a Saturn through like a 3-inch refractor, and that was kind of what hooked me. And then I went through, you know, different telescopes through the years. I was growing up and learned astronomy, and you know, it was way different back then. You know, in the we go back to the 70s and 80s. It's way different than it is now. And so, you know, going back to that, and I actually had my grandmother blessed me with a trip to Australia to go see Halley's Comet in 1987 as well. So that really sparked me, and it was a really cool thing. But life happened. I met my future wife. All those things came up, and had kids, and just the whole hobby just went to the wayside for years and years and years. So I kind of gave it up. And then, you know, last year my wife comes to me and she's like, you know, we got an empty nest now. You need a hobby because you're just driving me crazy. So I said, well, how about I get back into astronomy and astrophotography? She said, well, any hobby's good. And I told her, it's not a cheap hobby. That's the thing about it. It's an expensive hobby. It's a very expensive hobby. But it worked out, and I got some equipment. And so, you know, when you think about what equipment to get, you got a lot of decisions to make. And I went through this process myself. I had to decide, do I want to do a digital SLR? Do I want to do an actual astro camera? I had all those things to be thinking about. And so you want to, you know, pick equipment that's going to be easy for you to work with when you're new to the hobby. Again, I'm speaking to the beginners. The experts know all this stuff. But the problem is, if you go look on the web and at various places, there's lots of different opinions, but most of the things are geared toward people that are experienced. So I was very much on my own when I started this journey. And I had to make decisions about what to get and what to buy. And it's a bit overwhelming. And I ended up settling on an Asker 103 APL refractor because I thought that, you know, it's a good focal length. And instead of being, you know, too long of a focal length, it puts me in a good range where I can do lots of images. Not great for galaxies, but it's, you know, it's not terrible. And I ended up going with a Pegasus Astro Nix 101 mount, which I do like the mount, but as you'll see here in a second, I do have some concerns about it that I've had to deal with and I've had to overcome just based on my own personal experience. But I like the mount because you can see, you know, it's a very small, easy to move around mount. And this is where you can see this picture on the left over here is where I did astrophotography. And I'll show you a different angle of this on the next slide. This is where I did astrophotography last year. I started late April last year, getting into astrophotography. I hadn't really done any. I'd done a lot of astronomy years ago, but really not any astrophotography, so to speak. So this was all new, and there was a lot to learn. And I had to make a decision as well. Okay, am I going to go with, you know, the easy way to go? Am I going to go with a ZWO with an ASI Air? Or do I want to, you know, do Nina because of some of the great things of Nina being able to have, you know, support for different cameras, for example. That's obviously a big deal, not being stuck in a ZWO universe. It's not necessarily a bad thing, and I'm not saying it is, but yeah, I'd rather have flexibility and have options to work with. So this is a a couple of pictures of my setup. There is my Astro camera over there. It's an Ogma 26 megapixel monochrome camera. I ended up going with monochrome as well. You can see my filter wheel there and the mount there. And then you can see, here's the problem. This picture on the right. You see my telescope there? You see that street right there in front? Well, I told you, yeah, I've got that view in the west, but it's all trees back there except for just that one area. And so my only place to do astrophotography was the front yard. I'm lined up on Polaris, where Polaris is going to be right there, basically. But that's what I did last year. And, I got pretty good at it over time. It definitely was, there were a lot of challenges. And the biggest challenge I had is not having someone there to hold my hand at times. I felt very alone at times. I had a friend that had been into astrophotography and astronomy for years, but his equipment's old. And so when I talked to him, he was not a lot of help either. When we had discussions, he didn't know anything about Nina. And so, watch videos. I'll give you some of my thoughts on those here at the end of this. But, here's my thoughts for someone just getting started in astronomy and they want to get into astrophotography. I would really start with learning the sky. See, that's what I got exposed to years ago. There was none of this go-to stuff and this automation. You had to do everything manually and really you look at your star atlases and understand those things and look at your books. We didn't have apps in there. Was no phones back like this back in the 80s. So, it was a whole different world. So I really think it's important you learn your constellations and what major stars are out there and what seasons they're in. That's going to help you enhance your understanding of the universe and have better enjoyment. Because I went to a happy hour, it was a work happy hour last year, and guy was he's showing his pictures he'd taken with his telescope. He'd taken them with a sea star. And I started asking him questions. What was that? What did you take? He didn't know. He didn't know what constellation it was in or like anything about the object. So that's kind of I think that holds some people back. Now, some people don't care. They just want to take pretty pictures. And that's perfectly fine if you just want to take pretty pictures. But if you really have a love for the science of astronomy and want to really, get into astronomy and astrophotography and even astrophysics, having an understanding of these things, I think, is a really important thing. As I mentioned, for someone starting off, I would definitely recommend them to get something easy to handle, like a refractor. Don't do what I did with my, I told you, I mentioned when I was 8, I got my dad had gotten a 3-inch, I think it was a Pasco or something telescope. I don't remember now what brand it was, but it was, that was in the 70s, a long time ago. And he was the one that first showed me Saturn. Well, I'm like, well, you're young. You think, well, bigger is better. And so, big mistake. I got a 13-inch Dobsonian for Christmas. You think about that, an 11-year-old dealing with an 13-inch Dobsonian telescope, and having to set that up every night. That was not a good experience. And I went through several different telescopes and ended up with a Celestron Super C8 Plus is what I actually took to Australia with me because it was more portable. That would not have gone, the Dobsonian, that would not have gone to Australia. That would not work. But anyway, coming to Nina. Why Nina? Well, as I mentioned a little bit in the beginning, Nina is free. It's open source software. And it doesn't lock you into an ecosystem of cameras. ZWO gives certain areas that give you more flexibility, mounts and things like that, but they're very limited on many of the devices that they support. Where Nina is a very open-ended framework because of the Alpaca and the ASCOM drivers that we can use with it. So I think Nina is a great place for someone new to astrophotography and new to astronomy that's really getting into it to start. It has everything you need in it. You got your star atlas there. You've got your images of your galaxies and your nebulas that you're photographing. You can, we'll look at some of this in a minute. It can control your telescope. control your cameras, your filter wheel. I mean, you name it, it controls it all. And they've made it very easy. Again, you don't want to try to eat the elephant all at one time. You want to work your way into it. And that's what I did last year. I mean, I started very slow because I had no help. And I was, trial and error as I tried to learn this. But I did, I do not regret the decision to go with Nina over ZWO. Zero regrets. Even though I've had a lot of headaches and learned a lot of lessons, definitely would never go back. I've had somebody try to sell me some ZWO equipment. They had a camera and ASI Air. I'm like, nah, I'm good. I'm pretty happy with Nina. So as far as setting up Nina, there you go to the website and you can go, look at these things later yourself. Once you install the software, there's other things you need to go through, and I won't go through that. I'll give you a really good website that you can go to toward the end of this presentation, that if you want to go in and download Nina and get all the plugins and all the things you need, all your ASCOM drivers, all that stuff, it's a very helpful place. But once you get Nina set up, you install your drivers and you start connecting everything up. And what I would recommend to a beginner, don't try to hook everything up at once. You hook everything to that mini computer or to that USB hub you can have connected to the mini computer. And I do recommend having a USB hub and not try to feed everything into the mini computer. But with that said, I would not plug everything in at once if I did it over. A nightmare situation with communication problems and port issues and all this I was having to deal with. And so I had to take a step back. And as myself, as a senior person in the area of information technology, I should have known better than to try to hook everything up at once. Just not ideal. By doing things slowly, and that's the way I would do it. I had to recommend it again in the future. Now, the other thing with Nina that frustrated me very much when I got started was the polar alignment. And part of it was self-inflicted because I am very meticulous, and I want that alignment to be perfect. And so I'd sit there and mess with it for an hour to try to get it, down to just a few arc seconds. It's like, and you don't need to do that either. So that kind of challenge. The other thing with Nina and the Pegasus Nix mount is, now I don't know if it's fixed or not because I stopped looking at it every time. But what'll happen, or what was happening with the three-star alignment in Nina, that plugin, and the Nix mount, is somehow they were getting out of sync with each other, and when you would go check your polar alignment in the middle of the night, because I was was very anal about it. I'm like, I gotta go. Is it still aligned? So I spent way too much time on that. And but when you go back and check it, it'd be way off, be like 4 degrees off. I'm like, my polar alignment can't be that far off, and it really wasn't. But it drove me crazy. So those are things I'd be thinking about, if you get started. And, the fact that I went with a Pegasus mount, if I had it to do over, I would probably go with a ZWO AM5, just in hindsight. But I had another person that influenced me, I won't name names, toward the Pegasus. And then after I bought it, he's like, and he came back and said, I wouldn't have bought that. I'm like, well, you told me to buy it. He said, well, I tested it out more and I changed my mind. I'm like, well, thanks, because I already bought it. So anyway, because it does have some issues, and not only with the Nina thing, it has some issues with backlash in the altitude gear for adjusting your altitude. The azimuth is fine, but the altitude on it does have a little backlash, and it takes some getting used to with that backlash. And I know every mount has its own issues, but that one was particularly a frustrating thing. Now, once you get everything set up, you want to get familiar with the interface and test those connections like I mentioned. And start simple. You don't need to use Advanced Sequencer even the first month, if you're new to this hobby, and start using Nina. Just go in, and I'll show you some of this in a second. Just go into the image and just take an image. I mean, that's kind of the goal at first. Can I get pictures, and does this thing track? You know, you can take a 2 or 3 minute exposure and see how the tracking goes. So it's really good to start with something simple, not an advanced sequencer for sure. I certainly enjoy that now, and we'll talk about it a little bit in a minute. But also use a bright target like M13 or M42 or maybe M16, depending on the time of year. So just look for a brighter target, a big target for the right time of year, and work on that. And also, I would not, when I tell people now, when you start off, practice the polar alignment, because that's like fundamental. And you all know this that are experts. That is fundamental to getting good images. And so the Nina 3-star point alignment method is good. But we could also use Sharp Cap. I've used that a few times, but it's just so easy to go back to the 3-star alignment. Also, I also have a Pole Master or whatever that I got from QHY that I also have used. But it's just easier to use the 3-star alignment, honestly, because it's just faster than having to mess with all that other stuff. But again, it's not perfect. So as I mentioned, polar alignment, it's critical. You don't want to underestimate this, and you want to make sure you get a really good polar alignment and practice it until you get it down. See, I can do and I probably can't now because my telescope's been at a star front since January. It hasn't been usable since January, but it's been out there since then. There were lots of headaches and issues. I mean, they've really done a good job. I will applaud them that they are rock stars out there, and the team of support people, they're great. I had to drive out there twice. It's about 150 miles away from me, so I didn't want to ship equipment out there, so I drove equipment out there and had to go out there a second time and do other stuff. But I think we've eventually gotten things at a place where they need to be. But back to the polar alignment thing, yeah, I probably can't do it as fast anymore. But I got to a point where I could do it in a minute or two and have a really good polar alignment. But it just takes practice. But I had to deal also with a mount backlash. And again, you learn that. You learn your mount. The more you practice, the more you play with it. Now, focus is also key. And, there's lots of ways to focus. I started out with a manual focus, and that was not ideal. My first month of having my setup, because I'd spent so much money on the equipment, it's expensive. This hobby is not a cheap hobby. And so, I had to go, and I probably should have just bought the focus. If I had to do over, I would have just bought the focuser, because that first month was frustrating with the focus issues, having to use a mask to focus. And it's less than ideal. But a sharp focus is going to be essential. Also, a good focus on your finder if you're using a finder scope, or if you're using off-axis guider, obviously the focus is going to be important as well. But that focus, the problem with a refractor, it shifts over time, and as the temperature changes, it can be very sensitive. So having an autofocuser is going to help with that rather than doing a manual focus. So again, if you're new to this, spend the extra money up front, and you can get these autofocusers cheap now. ZWO has one for like less than $200 that you can get. The Pegasus one that I have, Focus Cube, was like $300, but I should have probably gotten the ZWO. Anyway, you also want to be thinking about your darks that you shoot. Now, again, they're not as big of a deal. Some people say you don't need them at all. I'm not sure I'm in that school of thought on that, but you definitely need at least compare that. I think my pictures look better with darks than without. I'll show you one of mine in a minute that didn't use darks. But anyway, the dark frames are going to help us obviously capture the camera noise, and they're going to be at the same temperature as our imaging session. There's lots of videos on that, so I'm not going to belabor that to you. You can go read about that and watch videos on that. Now, your flat frames are also very important, especially when you got a refractor and you're dealing with vignetting or maybe dust spots. I've got dust spots all over my optics. So flat frames are another important thing. And for the first couple of months, I didn't do flat frames, and I had some terrible pictures because of it. But I was just learning. I didn't really care how my pictures looked at first. I cared more over time, but because again, that's a whole other thing to master. Not only are you having to master, if you're new to the whole thing, you're having to learn astronomy. You're having to learn how this equipment works and polar alignments and right ascension and declination and all these things you're having to think about and put all this stuff together. Again, for the experts out there that have been doing this for years, they don't even think twice about this stuff. But when you're new to it, these are things that you're going to want to think about and that are going to be important. But these flat frames are going to help clean all these things up and make your images look a whole lot better. So, practice that. Flat frames, though, were a pain as well because I started out doing them with shooting them at dawn, right before the sun came up, with a t-shirt over the front of the telescope. Well, that meant I had to get up and go outside at 5 o'clock in the morning and shoot those things because you can't automate that when you got to go put a t-shirt over the telescope. That wasn't fun. So another investment I would recommend for anyone, again, you're spending most of your money on the camera and the mount and the telescope. So these little accessories, yeah, it adds up, but I would recommend spending the money on those things. And I would get good accessories that are going to complement your setup, that are going to work well in Nina and that you feel comfortable with. So go watch videos, go watch Quiv or go watch Luco, go watch those guys talk about gear because they have a lot of expertise in that. I spent many hours watching those guys. But get those things down because that's going to make your life a lot easier. I ended up eventually buying a flip panel from Deep Sky DAC because again, I'll automate this whole thing. So whenever it's done for the night, panel closes, automatically shoots the flats, and I'm done. And I can go wake up and go get my images. Now, I was again doing this at home before, but now I've got it remote. Now, why did I go remote? Well, having access to dark skies without having to travel, because they're like Bortle, they claim it's Bortle 1 there. Again, I've not been there at night because they don't let you hang out there at night. I mean, you could go hang out outside in the, by the road or whatever, but inside of the compound, you can't stay there after dark. So they claim it's Bortle 1. They showed me pictures of it. So it is really dark because when I'm shooting pictures, it's certainly there's a lot less sky glow and there's a lot less of those artifacts in my images. So I can definitely see that. But again, I haven't had a lot of time to do stuff out there because I haven't been out there that long. Not actually running. The other day was the first night. Again, I took it out there in January. And the other day was the first night it actually ran most of the night. Then it got cloudy and the dome closed. Or the roof closed. So, that's stuff to think about. Also, yes, it's convenient because I can configure it to Nina with my advanced sequencer to run and go do its thing. And I don't have to do anything. I don't even have to go check on it because I've got it set up. When the roof opens, it detects that. It unparks itself and goes and does its thing. Again, you're not going to get there overnight, but that's kind of the goal, to get to a point where it does all the work and I can enjoy the fruits of my labor. Here's a couple of pictures from Starfront when I was out there. And I know Bray's going to be coming on here in a couple of weeks and he'll be probably showing some live footage from there. But this is what the layout looks like. And that's the building that I'm in over there. And you can see there is my telescope over here to the left in this picture, out there all set up and doing its thing. So I highly recommend the place. I think there's some things that they need to maybe adjust and reconsider some of the way their model works. But if you have good like equipment that they're very familiar with, say like an astrophysics mount or say a ZWO mount, it's gonna be pretty flawless. I've talked to other people, it's gone pretty flawless. If you have an oddball, and I know Pegasus is not that much of an oddball, but out there it is because there's only like 2 of them out there. So they don't have the experience working with those as much. And so you got to kind of help them more with that when you're dealing with that. But anyway, they eventually got it all set up. They had to redo the polar alignment last week or 2 weeks ago because somehow it got messed up. I'm not sure how the polar alignment got messed up. I don't think it was tight. I don't know because I'm not out there. I can't see it. So, you definitely went the wrong way there. Sorry. As far as that remote setup, and we'll get into Nina here in just a minute. You gotta have good communication with the staff there, and you need to treat them with respect and kindness. They're your friends, and they want to work with you and do a good job. Now, like I said, I haven't had the greatest success stories so far, and I've had a lot of frustration with them, but it's complex. You know how hard it is. Those of you that have stuff set up at home, stuff breaks, stuff messes up. You got a remote set up and, say like a finder, a camera on your finder falls off. Well, you got to somehow deal with that, or things break. I had to replace a mini PC. I had to replace a focuser, and a whole bunch of cables in the last month out there. And I had to install a USB hub. I got a Pegasus Astro USB hub out there. So yes, I've had to do more and spend more to make everything stable, but I'm really hoping at a point I've reached that place of stability. Now, for those of you that are new to everything, I'm going to give you some couple of recommendations before we go over to Nina. There's the documentation for Nina. You can go to the website and read that documentation. It's a lot. There's a lot to read out there. Also, astronomy forums like Cloudy Nights. I would highly recommend Cloudy Nights. There's so much to read out there. And these days, you don't know what to go search, where to go find these things. You can always use an AI. Use like Grok or use ChatGPT and ask it questions. And it'll go out and like comb all these places and put together information for you. So there's lots of good stuff out there. And if you really want a really well-written book on astrophotography, he gets pretty technical in this book, but it's called the Astrophotography Manual, A Practical Approach to Deep Sky Imaging. I can't think of the guy's name that wrote the book, but you can get that book off Amazon, and that is a great book as well. And as far as further learning, Quiv, everybody loves Quiv, the lazy geek. So go look at Quiv's stuff. He does live sessions sometimes too, and you can learn things from that. And Luco's been doing more live sessions lately, and I love watching Luco. He's amazing. And Patriot Astro is one I really like, but I'm not sure what happened to him. It's like he kind of just disappeared off the face of the earth. But his YouTube channel is still there, and his website is still there. And Patriot Astro has the best documentation on his website and the best videos for configuring Nina and even advanced sequencing in Nina to work flawlessly. That's what I did. I went through line by line with him. I got my little Melee mini PC set up, just like he said, installed everything on it, went through all of that, and worked through trial and error, and definitely highly recommend those resources. Now, before we go out to Nina and look at this, if you think about this as a beginner, astrophotography is a journey, and you're not going to get great images. My images are still not great. I'm getting better, but I've got a lot to learn still. I got people that are years of experience on me, and I'm trying to learn from some of those people too. And like even this group with the Astro Imaging channel, there's great presentations on here. And I like to watch those to learn new things and develop my skills. There's lots of great stuff. So there's so many resources out there that we didn't have 20, 30 years ago. And Nina, again, if you're new to this, Nina is honestly, in my opinion, the recommended way to go. It's got the most open ecosystem. So you're not going to worry about, is my camera compatible? Is my focuser compatible? Like you're going to deal with an ASI Air. I think it's much easier. As I already mentioned as well, you start small. Don't try to do it all at once. Get one thing down. Get your polar alignment down first. Then, it's not a race. It's a marathon. Treat it like a marathon and be patient. And then you will eventually be able to capture the wonders of the night sky. Don't get frustrated, because every challenge, including remote setup issues, is an opportunity to learn. See, initially when I was doing this, like the first month, I was so frustrated. But I started, and I talked to my friend that couldn't help me because, again, he didn't use Nina and used old equipment. But he tried to encourage me, and he said, Dustin, he said, you got to think about it differently. He said, don't go out there and get frustrated. He said, go out there and look at it as an opportunity to learn. He said, don't start the night. That's the other thing. Have your expectations set. Something's probably going to go wrong tonight. I'm going to have to deal with something going wrong. If you go at it with that attitude, if nothing goes wrong, hey, that's great. But if something does go wrong, then you're not already in a frustrated state and you're prepared to deal with those challenges. So look at everything as a learning opportunity, because you're going to learn something from it. It may be something dumb, but you'll learn from it. And here's a few images that I have taken over the last year. Most of these are from the summer and early fall. You can see like the lobster claw, the heart nebula, and then I'm trying to remember what that one is. Is that M81? I can't remember which one it is, but those are all images that I shot in Nina with my software. And this one over here with this galaxy, again, I should know the name of the stupid galaxy. I can't remember. But this galaxy, I didn't shoot any darks or flats on it. So it's not great. Again, I was happy with it because, hey, that's progress. I continued to, as I got better, I got that flat panel that would do my flats. As I learned to use Nina better, and as I learned to use PixInsight, I got a little better. There's a picture I took of the Andromeda Galaxy. There's a picture I took of the Fireworks Galaxy. This picture was in July. This is like in September or something like that. So I can probably go in and probably going to redo this one because I've learned a lot about PixInsight since then. So there's that one. Then there's the Horsehead Nebula that I took back in December. So I'm definitely feel like I'm improving. My pictures are getting better. I can definitely still see room for improvement and things to work on, but I'm pretty happy with that. And here's one that I took right before I took my telescope out to Starfront. I don't have any good images from Starfront yet, but right when I took my telescope out right before I took it out, there's a picture of the Crab Nebula. So that's a few little pictures there. Let's go over here to Nina for a minute. And if anybody has any questions, I am more than happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Hi, Dustin. There's a lot of chat over on YouTube, but I haven't seen any questions.
Okay.
So I think we're good.
All right. Good deal. All right. So most of you probably are familiar with Nina. Most of you probably use it. But if you're new to it, probably never used this before. So this interface has a lot of things in it. And again, I'm talking to the beginners. You got to look at your equipment. And you want to make sure you're going to go through and you're going to have to configure all your equipment. That's going to be one of the first steps. You start hooking everything up, like I said, one device at a time initially, so you get everything worked out and everything's connecting. And get these things connected and make sure that, okay, that's correct. And then you'll put in your labels for your filter wheel, for which filters you have in there. So all those things you have to do. You go through, you get all this stuff set up. I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time going through this again because there are videos that go through this. You can use the Sky Atlas. I sometimes use it. Most of the time, though, I know what I want to photograph, so I just go in and I use the framing wizard. And so I come into the framing wizard, and again, you need to make sure you have your offline sky map, especially if you're going to be remote. Although at Starfront they've got internet, but if I'm at a remote site using my telescope, or if I'm like away from home, having the offline sky map is good because then I can get my images inside of here. But you know, this is where you need some understanding of things. Sure, you can use the Sky Atlas. Again, there's videos on it to tell it, okay, I want to go find, you know, this type of galaxy cluster or this type of globular cluster or whatever. When you're new, you probably won't know what any of that stuff is. But then you can go through that and it'll show you all the objects that are going to be visible on that given night. Or if you know astronomy a little better and you've seen pictures from Hubble and other things, then you can go into framing and just name an object that you want to name, type it in. So I'm going to switch this to like, I'm not going to go to it, but I'm going to switch it to like M65. And I'm going to go load image. You can see there's the Leo triplet right there. And the cool thing is, if you've got your stuff set up correctly, it's going to show you exactly what your frame of reference is going to be for your camera. Because I got a 26 megapixel APS-C sensor in this camera, you can see that I've got a pretty big field here. It's not a full frame, but it's not too bad. And so I can get an idea of what these things are going to look like. So I go through, do my framing. I'll probably move it around a little bit, center it, whatever I want to do. And if you have a rotator, even if you don't, if you have like a manual rotator on your telescope, but if it's remote, you can't really do that. But you go into determine rotation from camera, and it'll determine, hey, is this the right frame? So it'll look at it, and it'll probably move it a little bit. I think it should be pretty accurate right now because I do have a rotator on this telescope because it is remote. So you get everything kind of lined up, and then you tell it to skew and center. And it's going to move the telescope to the target. If I go back to the one I had before, that wasn't it. 2301 is the wrong one. Nah, where'd it go? That's not it either. Oh, well, that's okay. So if I go do something like this, I go M42 because that's up right now. Oops. Again, once you get everything in here, notice it's going to show you the coordinates. It's going to show you a little map down here. I mean, a little timeline. And you can see where it currently is. Here's where it is now. You can see where twilight is and where dusk actually happens, astronomical dusk. And then now we're into the night. And you can see that M42 is going down on that image. You can see there's M42. So I don't need a planetarium software. You could certainly use something like Stellarium or something else, but don't really need to because I can pretty much do everything in Nina. That's the great thing about it. It's a free piece of software. You don't have to buy anything. And there's lots of great plugins that are available for it as well. So you go down here to plugins, you can see there's a whole bunch of plugins in this thing. Now, I'm not using them all right now. I'm only using a handful of plugins. But I can, it'll also, it's going to tell me when there's updates available. So you always want to, keep these up to date for the most part. I wouldn't recommend just as soon as that's another thing. When you come in here and you see an update, if everything's working okay or has been, I probably wouldn't upgrade it. I've done that too many times. I've had that happen with the Unity drivers for the Pegasus stuff. And the Unity drivers, sometimes they release them too quickly and they break some compatibility with something. So I'm not the most eager to have the latest and greatest. If it's working, I would leave it alone. It's going to go much smoother for you in that regard. So you've got other settings in here. You're going to have to configure like equipment settings. This is where you're going to set up your pixel size for your camera, your telescope focal length. All these things go into here, and that's what makes that star atlas, that framing wizard, look correct, because it has the correct information from here. So you want to make sure you get this information correct. And you can change all the parameters that you want to in here, and whatever works for you. And you can see I do have it tied to Stellarium because I sometimes use it. Not that often, but certainly do sometimes. And then in here, your autofocus thing, you got to decide for autofocus what you want to do for autofocus. That's another thing with the autofocus. Do you want to use parabolic or do you want to use a hyperbolic? Because you got different options here that you can go with, and different schools of thought on each one. I'm not going to recommend one over the other. Those are things you just have to play with. And there's certain things you're going to need to, again, I would recommend watching videos on these specific areas that talk about what the best practices are for these individual items, because there's lots of great stuff out there on this. And then when you go into your settings for your imaging, this is where your meridian flip settings are. This is one of the most frustrating things that I've had to deal with in this hobby, is the meridian flip. I had lots of issues with it. Eventually, I decided to, I don't have to photograph the whole night. I'd rather not hit my mount. And so I have it where it's going to pause before it gets to, especially if it's a high target, pause before it gets to the meridian, go past the meridian, and then move the telescope. That way it doesn't hit the mount. So there's lots of things that'll happen to you. Again, the experts already know this, so they're not, surprised by any of this. I learned this by trial and error and hitting my mount and breaking cables a few times. So those are things that you want to be careful of and be aware of. Now, this is where you ultimately want to get, is where you can go into the advanced sequencer and create sequences in there. Because the advanced sequencer is a very powerful interface. And again, I've got a bunch of plugins installed. So I have things like Ground Station in here and some other things that you might not have if you just have a basic setup, just because of the plugins that I'm using. You'll have the basic things like camera, but connector is from a plugin. But connector is something you're really going to want, because things like connector, look, I can tell it to connect all equipment. And so again, because I'm out at Starfront, I don't have to go check on my telescope at night. Everything's turned on. It's parked at the end of the night. But when it becomes time when dark falls and the the roof opens, I can tell it to connect all the equipment. So I can build these sequences in here to connect or disconnect my equipment. Then you can do things like shoot your darks and your flats in here as well. On my camera settings, I can tell it how to do my exposures. Under my flat device, see, I can tell it to shoot my flats. And I can tell it to turn on that flat panel that I have, that Deep Sky Dad flat panel, and tell it to close the flat panel cover at the end of the night, shoot those flats, and then they're ready to go. Then you got the focuser in here, ground station, the guider. Guiding is a whole different animal too, and especially with a mount like the Nix 101, because it's a harmonic drive mount, it doesn't, without guiding, it's not going to track very well. So you're going to want to use something like PhD2. Again, you can go read about these things, but PhD2 is what everyone uses that I know for guiding and all the videos that I watch. And you can see here that we're currently tracking on what the target I currently have going right here. It's tracking not too bad at the moment. You can see the error is pretty small there on that. So everything looks good at the moment in here. We'll see how it goes as I start an imaging session later, but that's kind of, you know, what's going on there inside of PhD2. And then when you go into your equipment, you have to make sure that's all connected as well. And then you'll see your guiding bars in here. There's lots of things going on. There's lots of moving parts. There's lots of things you're having to track and work with. But again, if you don't try to do it all at once, if you take it slow, if you just do a little bit at a time and learn those things and watch more videos, ask questions. There's lots of people that are happy to answer questions in various forums. Go ask those questions. Don't try to be a lone ranger like I was and try to figure it all out by yourself, because it takes a lot longer than it should have. Let's see. I think, I think that's you basically. One other thing I guess I'll mention in here. Where is it? No, I guess I've got the rotator in here, all that. But anyway, I mean, you know, there's lots of go check out Patriot Astro, because Patriot Astro has the best stuff on Nina, and I learned the most from him. Now, some of it's a little out of date, but it's still very similar and mostly relevant. So I thank everyone for their time and attention today. And I hope you have a wonderful evening and clear skies. Thank you.
Thanks so much. My camera's having a problem here, apparently. Eric, do we have questions in the chat?
Mostly it's people talking amongst themselves. So I didn't see any questions. Alex,
probably not. Probably got a bunch of experts out there. Probably bored because they already know all this stuff, is my guess.
No matter what, Dustin, there's always something to learn, no matter the presentation, no matter how much we think we know.
Yeah, you guys are so far advanced from me. I'm sure that, you know, there's so much I have to learn. Like I said, I've been doing this less than a year, and I'll get better at it over time. But it's just,
you know, I do have a comment about that. If you go into a room, no matter how smart you are or how much you know, there will be somebody who is either smarter than you or knows something you don't know and can add it to your list of things to know. I go to a lot of presentations and stuff, and I'm not all that good an astro imager or anything, but I go to a lot of them with other people, and they all bring something to the table. They all make me see something that I never saw before. And I said, oh, that's why that was supposed to work. And somebody got something like that out of this tonight, I'm sure. So there was an interesting question back there. Who was it from that started with SGP and has been using that for a while? There, Tim McCollum. Started with SGP, was using it for a long time. You know, I used SGP for a long time, and I still do like it. I think I prefer it to Nina still. But because I'm one of those people who's supposed to be able to explain things to other people in astroimaging, I decided I should learn something about it. And about 3 or 4 months ago, I decided, I really should learn what this NINA thing's about. And I started doing it. And I could not get the same problem Jim was having. It's a completely different type of interface. And there, you guys probably don't know this, but I used to be a teacher, regular old high school teacher and stuff like that. And there's this thing in teaching called critical attribute. And if you can teach that one critical attribute about any concept, that's important. And I know what the critical attribute is as far as transitioning from SGP to NINA and why it's difficult to do that. And it has to do with the organization of the interface, because they do essentially the same thing and all that other stuff. Okay, so but it's in the interface. I just have not figured out a way to explain the critical attribute. What is that critical difference? It has to do with the way they have the column of icons about the equipment and then the column of icons about the actual acquisition. And I just haven't figured out a way to express that. And when I do, I shall share it with people so that maybe they can make a transition easier than that. I do know I'm in a club with a bunch of imagers. We've got observatories stretching down the row. And last month or something, one of the guys from the other place was having a difficult time getting SGP to focus. And I hadn't used SGP for about 3 months because I was on this NINA kick trying to learn how to do that. And I walked down to his observatory and sat down and I looked at it and said, oh my gosh, this is so nice and clean. I could just see everything so easily. Now, is that because I used SGP for so much longer than NINA or not? But in my mind still, despite that long practice with the other program, which gives it a great advantage, I still think that the SGP interface is a lot cleaner and easier to figure out. NINA is just as powerful as getting everything done. And for those who figured out what that critical attribute is as to what the interface is actually doing, it's just as easy to use. But you got to figure that out. So the transition itself is hard, but using NINA isn't.
It was totally the opposite for me because like Sequence Generator Pro was the first piece of software I'd encountered that I had a hard time figuring out.
Yeah.
And then when I saw NINA for the first time, it immediately made sense to me, and I threw away SGP right away. And I think part of the reason that NINA made sense to me is because I've written a lot of code, done a lot of programming in my life, and the way that it's set up with like having a process, like a task that you put in a sequence, and you have these for loops, and you have this logic that's in there. It was very familiar to me. So it made a lot of sense to me right off the bat. So it does depend, I think, too, on if you have any background in something where that interface looks familiar.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
But yeah, I think it's so important too about what Dustin, what you were saying about repeating about taking things slow, and I guess really the biggest thing there too is to not feel like you're moving too slow, or people leaving you behind, or like you should be doing better or anything like that, because like this is a really hard hobby, guys. You all know that. And like you just
There's so much
you learn it more
complexity.
thoroughly when you take your time with it.
Because
I think a couple of questions have come in while we've been talking here. Guy or Guy, I don't know whether you're asking a question or making a comment. We have the native meridian flip options, and additionally, there are plugins that will perform the meridian flip too. Some are redundant and some others provides. And then he ends it with the question, which one of these meridian flip options work best?
For me, what's built into, share my screen again, what is in NINA, when you go in up here, because I tried some of those plugins and I was not happy with them. This I think is like what works best for me. And then also you got to make sure, and like because I use Unity because I have the Pegasus, and so in Unity you got to make sure you have meridian flip turned off in there. It'll screw up if they're both trying to do it. And you also got to remember PhD2 needs that setting to reverse the motors or whatever after the meridian flip. So all that stuff comes into play. But I think this works good, at least for me, because I'm paranoid about hitting that mount because I've broken cables. And now that it's remote, I don't want to be breaking cables out there because that's a huge pain when you break a cable out there because they don't always get to it the same night and you're down. So, I think pausing before the meridian flip, this works really well for me, honestly. I don't know for what other people's experience is with just the built-in meridian flip part, but the plugins I'm not so much with. I don't know. What do you think, Alex?
Oh, I'm peer mounted all the time almost. So, and when I'm not, I'm with my Sammy 135 and don't sweat it too much.
Okay.
So I'm not familiar with the meridian flip settings or any of that kind of stuff. It just all goes automatic. So
Yeah, I haven't tried using any other methods besides the native meridian flip settings. And you can kind of design your own meridian flip if you use stuff like sequence power-ups, things like that. But the series of settings, the series of things that the meridian flip in Nina does has been working for me and is what I want. So
yeah. And in my advanced sequence, you can see I've got them. I mean, I just throw the meridian flip in there. That's
yeah, actually, you can have that up in the global triggers. You don't even need to have that in each target.
Dale has a more philosophical question.
See, I learned something right there, Molly. So put it up in global triggers.
Okay. You can. It just saves you and some additional lines of space. But yeah.
Okay.
If Dale wants to know if two apps look identical or close enough, would they be meaningfully different or evolutionary? If you've got Voyager, SGP, I think is what Dale is saying. Nina, and there are others lined up one after the other. Don't they all do about the same thing?
Yeah, I would agree.
And the answer is, yeah. In my mind, they do the same thing. They use the same concepts. They have to. They're dealing with the same science and the same processes. But as Molly, who says because she's a programmer, she can understand Nina just by looking at it. And who was it that followed her shortly thereafter said, as a programmer, Kane F. Sky says, as a programmer, the idiosyncrasies of the advanced sequencing drive me up the wall. So guys, don't get particular on it. Just take a look at it and see if you like it. And if you like it, go. If you don't. And by the way, this one's free. This Nina thing is free, so
that's what I like.
You want to stop sharing your screen? So
yeah, you're still sharing.
Sorry.
I guess I got a comment to make about what you said, Alex. I think there are different classes of programs. Something like Voyager and Nina and ACP, they deal with automation, where you can set something up and it'll run all night and it knows what to do, depending on where the target is, how high up it is. SGP, I think, is a level simpler than that. It's not made for automation and works perfectly well for that. But if you want an automated system, I think Voyager and Nina, because it's free, and even ACP, although I have issues with that, are automation programs.
Yeah. Your target selection and scheduling can be much different.
And there is a learning curve. You have to build this up like, building a wall. You cannot learn everything at once.
No.
You start with the basics. You add a function. Maybe there's someone that can eat the whole meal in 5 minutes, but that ain't me, and I don't know anyone else that's able to absorb all of what a program can do. Learn the basics, build it up, and get, as someone said here, get some muscle memory on these programs so you're not struggling when you're setting it up.
Yeah. Work through like piece by piece, master something is the way I look. It's the way I see it. It's like take something, any area, master it, and then move on to something else. There's so much in it.
You know, it's not a whole lot different than learning PixInsight. You can't jump in right to the middle. You learn one thing, you learn another process, you learn another process, and pretty soon you have enough to do a decent image.
Yeah, still learning that one too. So it's like, that's what's tough about this hobby. You're having to learn the imaging part, processing the images, as well as all of this stuff too. It's a lot.
It definitely keeps those neurons firing, I'll tell you that.
Okay.
All right. I think we will go ahead and wrap it up there, unless we got any parting shot questions. But yeah, come back and visit us next week to hear about the a new image processing software called StarPX. And we'll be back here, same bat time, same bat place. And in case you were late tonight, it is daylight saving time in the United States now. So we're an hour in some direction different from you. But if you go to the astroimagingchannel.org, you can go to our calendar. It automatically converts the time zone to your time zone. So this way you never have to guess. Yeah. And as always, if you are interested in giving a talk on here, we would love to have you. Please drop us a note in the contact us button on the astroimagingchannel.org, and one of us will get back to you. And yeah, thank you so much, Dustin, for coming on again. I think people really enjoyed your talk. And
thank you, Dustin.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We'll go ahead and say goodnight. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Hey.
See you next week. Or you'll see us next week, I guess.
We're out.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.